The following is a special presentation of Fox 31 and our ongoing commitment to the military, serving those who serve.
I'm looking forward to a nice trip on the sea and getting together with the boys. I call them boys, you know. That's what I want to do. And then we'll get over to Great Britain and see some of the soldiers and talk to some of those vets. And that's it, you know. I thought that mine was the worst you could be. But these guys, some of them have, especially those guys that on D-Day hit the shore right away. That was rough, really bad. Yes, I was a POW for about 4 months. I was a guest of the German government. And meeting with these guys, sometimes it brings up some of the stuff. The little scab comes off the wound when you hear some of the stories. You can't get away from it. We're going to Brooklyn, my hometown. We're on. Look at that ship. Wow. Fantastic. Wow. It's big. Is this going to go on the water, or is it? Will it float? Oh yeah. Oh boy. Look at the front, the back. It's tremendous. Where's my room?
Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Jeremy Hubbard on board an ocean liner just off the coast of southern England, a ship filled with World War II heroes. Some 16 million Americans served during World War II, but now just 500,000 or so are left, just 7,500 from Colorado. And a few of them had a bucket list item that we were able to fulfill on board this very ship. From the minute the flag started waving at the sail-away party, from the minute they slipped past the New York skyline, past the Statue of Liberty, it was clear these heroes of World War II were in for an experience. For the third year in a row, a Denver-based charity called the Greatest Generations Foundation arranged for these 90-plus-year-old men to cross the Atlantic on an ocean liner, because this is exactly the way so many of them actually traveled to the battlefield during World War II. Not on Navy ships, but on luxury liners converted to troop transports painted battleship gray, a ship designed to hold a couple of thousand travelers, loaded up with 14,000 soldiers.
The Queen Elizabeth was full of men. It must have been 10, I don't know how many thousand. Plus, the big thing I remember, there were 2 swimming pools. They had drained the swimming pools, they put carpeting in, and they were crap shooting 24 hours a day. It was the biggest floating crap game there ever was.
I went over in the Queen Mary, and we look at the ship, and there's not a single space that isn't occupied for personnel. Floor to ceiling, like a Venetian blind, they'd have 4 or 5, and only the top bunk could sit up. The others, it was all horizontal.
What if these men could relive that experience with less crowded accommodations and share their war stories with captivated audiences every day for a week as they crossed the Atlantic aboard this massive ocean liner, more than 70 years after they did it the first time.
And they made sure that we ate, but very little.
That's the idea behind this program. And with hundreds of these veterans dying every day, the Greatest Generations Foundation wanted to make sure these stories didn't die with them.
That was the scariest part of my life.
Heartbreaking stories like those told by these two men, Harold Radish and Dennis Trudeau.
Towards the end, I was actually eating grass.
Both held prisoner of war during World War II.
Food wasn't much.
Radish was an Army infantryman captured and taken to a POW camp where he spent 4 months.
In the morning, we would get a loaf of bread, black bread, Schwarzbrot, and in there was straw, whatever it was, but it wasn't for you. It was for 12 to 13 guys. We would take the high card and select the guy, and he would do the slicing. You got to be very careful, because if one slice was a little bigger than the next one, we would yell and scream, you know. But the advantage to him was he kept the crumbs.
Hunger wasn't even the biggest problem he faced.
The worst part, one of the worst parts of being in the prison camp was the vermin, the lice. Never seen it in my life. Yeah. It just covered you.
Dennis Trudeau was a paratrooper who landed in Normandy on D-Day. He was injured, along with a friend, in an Allied bomb drop that morning.
Buddy beside me got a terrible piece of shrapnel in his back, and he was crying for his mother, and McPherson was his name, old Mac. And I took my morphine that I had and gave it to him, and he kept telling me, he said, I can't move my my legs. I can't move my legs. And I looked down at him. He didn't have no legs.
A short time later, he went to secure a bridge. When he got to the other side, he saw a pillbox with a couple of Germans in it.
The hardest thing I ever did was we fired at those Germans in that pillbox. I'd never killed a man. And I can't say that my bullet hit them or the other two guards, but both of them got killed.
A short time later, just 10 hours after jumping out of that airplane, his combat days were over. He was captured by the Germans and held prisoner for most of the next year.
I weighed 135 pounds when I jumped into France, and when I was liberated in May, I weighed 85.
Wow. Trudeau was wasting away. An occasional potato or piece of horse meat was a treat.
At night, you know, when we get together back in our barracks, we never talked about women. But boy, did we talk about how good our mothers could cook breakfast and cook dinner.
Back home, their parents were worried sick. They'd been sent telegrams saying their boys were missing in action.
I left home. My mother was a dark-haired, vivacious woman, cleaning, cooking, etc. When I got home, this was a gray-haired old lady. It took her close to a year to recover from all of the trials and whatever she went through was much worse than what we had gone through.
Finally, in the spring of 1945, the nightmare was over. The POW camps were liberated, and soon the war was finished.
The third day, when we kind of woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, one of the guys said, "Hey, yeah, the guards are gone, the guards are gone." So we took off walking. I looked up. I'm going to get a little emotion on this, but I looked up in the heavens. I said, "Lord, I'm free, I'm well, and I'm going home." And that,
Two World War II heroes who survived the unimaginable, went home and built families, careers, and a great country.
I won my first election with 56 votes.
Dennis went on to be a small-town mayor in Georgia. Harold, a school teacher.
You know, teaching school was another war. So, and then I spent 30 years teaching, being a dean of students, dean of discipline and stuff. And then I retired, and I've been living the good life.
They call themselves the luckiest men alive. And lucky is just how everyone in this crowd feels, hearing their stories in person before it's too late. Living history from two history makers. What a group of men, and it's estimated 127,000 more World War II heroes will die by the end of this year. So what a treat for us to be able to spend some time with them on board this ship. Welcome back as we cross the Atlantic with a group of World War II heroes, many of whom went to war on a luxury liner like this one more than 70 years ago. A Denver veterans charity, the Greatest Generations Foundation, arranged this trip to give these men a reminder of their youth when they were headed to the battlefields of Europe. These days, it takes about a week to cross the ocean from New York City to Southampton, England, on one of these vessels, and the seas can be rough. This is the North Atlantic, not far from where the Titanic went down. But for a group of guys who survived World War II, a few big waves are no problem at all.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
They're using the time on board to share their stories.
In the first wave, we brought in 21 boats. We lost 6 boats immediately.
Planes were diving from every direction, and our teakwood deck was splintering from their machine guns.
And these two men can tell the entire story of the war from start to finish.
So we took the sight cap off our periscope. Bam! There went the Arizona.
Stuart Headley was at Pearl Harbor when the war began for the U.S. And Greg Malikian?
They had come to surrender.
He's the one who announced to the world the war in Europe was over on May 7th, 1945. It all began with Headley, who was assigned to the USS West Virginia on that fateful morning, December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Hawaii. He was talking with a buddy on board.
So we were discussing what we were going to do that day. I was supposed to catch the boat at 9 o'clock to go over on the dock. But while we were having our coffee, it's about 5 minutes to 8 o'clock when over our loudspeaker came a wave fire and rescue party.
Soon he was in the throes of the sneak attack that left 2,300 men dead. He saw some of them die when he snuck a peek outside from his battle station.
And I estimated about 32 bodies went flying through the atmosphere. It was about 3 to 5 minutes later, there's an explosion in our turret. When that explosion took place in the left gun, 11 men were burned beyond recognition.
Stu narrowly escaped that day by jumping into the harbor.
And I broke surface twice before I got to the beach. The hottest breath of air I ever breathed in my life.
He'd go on to fight throughout the Pacific until war's end. And speaking of war's end, Greg Malikian has a special place in history.
He said, General Ike wants to know your names and your ages.
The 20-year-old was working at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force as a high-speed radio operator. At 3:30 a.m. one May morning, someone barged into the radio room.
And Eisenhower said, I want Malikian to send this coded message ending the war.
He typed out the following message sent to 15 million soldiers around the world.
Unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force. Surrender effective at 2:30 hours Central European Time.
The war in Europe was over, and Malikian was the one who delivered the good news.
So we can enjoy it today.
Yeah, it's impressive.
75 years later.
It's,
two men with a very special place in history. One saw the war's beginning, the other was there to watch it end. Both went on to have amazing lives with amazing wives.
Her and I were together for 64 beautiful years, raised 5 wonderful children, and had a great life.
And both are still here, well into their 90s, along with the rest of these heroes from the greatest generation, keeping their history alive on this Atlantic crossing. Welcome back as we cross the Atlantic Ocean with a group of World War II heroes, many of whom came to war this very way 75 years ago. Several of the veterans traveling in our group fought on D-Day 75 years ago this last June. They were there on Omaha Beach. It is sand where their brothers bled, where they watched American heroes die, where their efforts helped bring about the end of World War II.
I used to say to my guardian angel, hey, take care of me.
Joe Sheeta was aboard one of these LCVPs, landing members of the 29th Division on Omaha Beach before he was injured.
During the daylight, we headed for Normandy. And timed it so we would be there just in time, 5:30 when they started firing.
Donald Cobb was aboard the USS Murphy, a ship that bombarded German forces at Omaha and Utah beaches.
Yeah, I have a big book with all pictures and memorabilia. I never showed it to anybody.
And then there's Frank DeVita, who only recently started talking about what happened to him on D-Day.
My wife died 6 years ago, and she never knew what I did in the war. I never told her. I never told my kids, because it was too hard for me. I didn't want to bring the war back home to them.
DeVita was aboard one of these Higgins boats on D-Day. His job was to lower that ramp at the front of the boat so soldiers could get out and storm the beach.
When I dropped the ramp, the bullets would come into the boat, and I'd probably die. And I was scared. I froze for a few seconds. And I dropped the ramp, and 3 of my guys got off the boat, and they were cut down immediately. And the machine guns came into the boat and cut down about 14 to 15 of the guys in the front. It was like cutting wheat with a scythe. They just went down. So I was a little lucky because I was 3/4 of the way back in the boat. And I had these soldiers in front of me, and they were absorbing the bullets.
Frank says there is one young soldier he encountered on D-Day he'll never forget.
He had red hair. The machine gun took his helmet off and part of his head. And he was crying, help me, help me. And he fell at my feet. I couldn't help him because I had no morphine. I had nothing. And I didn't know what to do, so I started praying. Our Father who art in heaven. And it seemed to calm him down a little bit. And then I reached down and I touched his hand because I didn't want him to die alone. He squeezed my hand and he died. He was just a little boy. And that kid gave me nightmares my whole life.
Nightmares brought on by one single pivotal day in history that played out on these beaches 75 years ago. More than 4,400 Allied soldiers were killed on D-Day, and every day, the group of D-Day survivors we traveled with, thank God, they made it off those beaches alive. When we return tonight, the end of our 3,400-mile journey across the Atlantic with the heroes of World War II, and one last reunion with their European counterparts who helped win the war as well.